She thought she'd never walk again, but a young mechanic's kindness changed everything. This is a story of hope, courage, and an unforgettable miracle. Stay with us, and before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. In the bustling city of Seattle, life moved quickly, rain often painting the streets in a silver sheen. Hannah Parker, once a lively and energetic 19-year-old college student, now felt like an outsider in the very world she had once thrived in. Just a year ago, she had been running along the campus track, laughing with her friends, dreaming of becoming a journalist. But everything changed after a car accident left her with severe spinal injuries. Doctors had tried every form of therapy, but the prognosis was always the same. The chances of walking again were slim to none. Each day in her wheelchair was a reminder of what she had lost. Friends who once filled her life slowly drifted away, unsure of what to say or how to help. Hannah's once bright personality dimmed, replaced by a quiet sadness. She attended fewer social gatherings, rarely visited the places she once loved, and avoided mirrors that reflected her new reality. It wasn't just her legs that felt paralyzed, it was her spirit. Her mother encouraged her to keep trying, and therapy, but Hannah secretly carried the heavy belief that her future was gone, trapped forever in a chair that felt more like a cage than a lifeline. On a grey, rainy afternoon, Hannah decided to leave her small apartment for a breath of fresh air. She wheeled herself down the familiar streets to a local cafe she used to visit with friends. The rain misted softly on her face, and for a fleeting moment, she almost felt normal. But just as she reached the cafe entrance, her wheelchair jolted suddenly. One of the wheels had locked, sending a loud squeak echoing into the street. Struggling, she bent forward, trying to move it, but nothing worked. People walked past quickly, some glancing her way, others avoiding her eyes. Each hurried step of the strangers reminded her of what she could no longer do. Embarrassment stung her cheeks. She tried again, jerking the wheel, but it refused to budge. A couple passed by, whispering something Hannah couldn't hear, and her heart sank deeper. She lowered her eyes, gripping the armrests tightly. In that moment, the world felt cruel, indifferent to her struggle. She wanted to vanish, to escape the pity in people's faces, or worse, the cold indifference of those who ignored her entirely. The rain fell harder, droplets sliding down her hair as her hope drained like water into the pavement below. Then out of the corner of her eye, Hannah noticed a figure walking toward her. He wasn't dressed in a suit or carrying an umbrella like the others. Instead, he wore a faded denim jacket, work boots splattered with grease, and carried a small backpack slung over his shoulder. His face carried the kind of warmth that made strangers feel less alone. Daniel Hayes, a 24-year-old mechanic from a neighborhood garage, had been on his way home when he saw her struggling. Something inside him refused to walk past. He didn't see a girl in a wheelchair. He saw someone who needed help, and he knew he could provide it. "Looks like you're having some trouble," Daniel said gently, crouching slightly so he wouldn't tower over her. His voice was calm, carrying no judgment, just sincerity. Hannah hesitated. She wasn't used to strangers stopping. Most people either looked at her with pity or avoided her altogether. She studied his face for a moment, trying to sense if there was any mockery or false sympathy, but all she found was genuine concern. Slowly, she nodded. "It's stuck. I can't get it to move." Her voice was quiet, almost ashamed. Daniel smiled, setting his backpack down. "Mind if I take a look? I work with machines all day. Maybe I can figure this out." His confidence wasn't arrogant, just steady. Something about his tone made Hannah feel a flicker of trust. She gave a small nod, and Daniel immediately knelt beside the wheelchair, examining the jammed wheel. Rain dripped from his hair as he ran his fingers over the metal parts, his focus sharp. Hannah watched him closely, noticing the way he worked with quiet determination, as if fixing this chair was the most important thing in the world. As he worked, silence stretched between them. Hannah felt a swirl of emotions. Embarrassment that she needed help, relief that someone had finally stopped, and a strange curiosity about this young mechanic who treated her not with pity, but with respect. "You really don't have to do this," she murmured softly. Daniel looked up, a warm grin spreading across his face. "And let the rain win? No way. Besides, everyone deserves to keep moving forward." His words lingered in the air, striking something deep in Hannah's heart. It had been so long since anyone reminded her of possibility instead of limitation. The wheel loosened with a sharp click, and Daniel adjusted a few more parts with a small tool from his bag. "Try it now," he said, stepping back slightly. Hannah hesitated, then pushed forward. To her surprise, the chair rolled smoothly, almost effortlessly. She blinked, taken aback. "It's better," she whispered, her voice carrying both relief and disbelief. Daniel chuckled, brushing the rain from his forehead. "Better is a start. Sometimes that's all we need." His words were simple, but they held a kind of wisdom Hannah hadn't heard from anyone in months. For the first time in a long while, Hannah felt a small spark of hope. This wasn't just about a wheelchair being fixed, it was about the kindness of a stranger who saw her as more than her limitations. She found herself smiling, a real smile that reached her eyes. Daniel noticed and grinned back, his heart quietly lifted by the change in her expression. To him, it was just another repair. To Hannah, it was a reminder that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. The rain continued to fall around them, but inside her, a light had begun to shine again. Daniel crouched again by Hannah's wheelchair, the rain-soaked pavement glistening beneath his boots. He opened his small backpack, pulling out a handful of tools, each one marked with scratches from years of work in his garage. Hannah watched quietly, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the edge of her jacket. Most people who stopped to help in the past had done so reluctantly, offering pity more than real assistance. But Daniel's focus was different. His brow furrowed in concentration, as though her wheelchair was no less important than a car engine or a valuable machine. Piece by piece, he inspected the chair, tightening loose screws, adjusting the frame, and carefully examining the stuck wheel. His hands moved with ease, confidence flowing from years of practice. Every click of the wrench, every adjustment of a bolt carried an almost rhythmic precision. Hannah sat silently, her usual frustration giving way to quiet curiosity. She wasn't used to being the center of anyone's attention, especially not in a way that felt empowering rather than humiliating. Daniel didn't look at her like she was broken. He looked at her as someone worth helping. Minutes passed, the rain softening to a drizzle. Daniel paused and glanced up at her with a reassuring smile. "I think we can do more than just fix this. Let's make it better," he said. Hannah blinked in surprise. "Better?" she echoed, not used to hearing such optimism. Daniel nodded confidently. From his bag, he pulled out smoother bearings, tiny but powerful, improvements he often used for custom bikes. With careful precision, he swapped them into her wheels, explaining each step as if she were his apprentice. "This will make the ride smoother, less effort for you," he explained warmly. Hannah leaned forward slightly, watching every move. Her heart raced as she realized he wasn't just repairing it, felt like he was rebuilding a part of her life. He added small, padded grips to the handles, adjusted the seat angle, and even polished the worn-out armrests. Each thoughtful touch was more than mechanical, it was personal, a quiet statement that her comfort mattered. No doctor, no therapist had ever shown this kind of dedication. They had given her treatments and instructions, but Daniel was giving her something she hadn't felt in years: dignity. When Daniel finally sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on a rag, He looked at her with a spark of anticipation. "Want to give it a try?" he asked gently. Hannah hesitated, her chest tightening with nervous energy. She gripped the wheels and pushed forward. To her astonishment, the chair glided smoothly across the pavement as if it had been transformed into something new. She gasped softly, her eyes widening in disbelief. For the first time in years, movement felt effortless, free, even joyful. Her lips trembled, and then, slowly, a smile began to form. That smile spread like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Passers-by noticed the change, pausing to watch the scene. A young woman, who moments earlier had been struggling with a broken chair, now rolled gracefully down the sidewalk, her laughter ringing through the damp air. People who had walked past indifferently now stopped to admire, some even clapping quietly, as though witnessing a small miracle. Hannah's cheeks flushed with warmth, her chest rising and falling as she breathed in a freedom she thought she had lost forever. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from exhilaration. Daniel stood to the side, watching her with quiet pride. To him, it was a simple repair, something any good mechanic should do. But as he saw Hannah's face light up, he realized this was far more than just a job. He had given her more than mobility. He had given her a taste of life again. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he asked, his voice carrying a mix of humility and joy. Hannah looked at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "It feels like I'm flying," she whispered, and in that moment she truly meant it. The rain had stopped completely now, the clouds breaking apart to reveal streaks of soft evening light. Hannah wheeled herself in a small circle, the movement smooth and controlled. She laughed again, the sound bubbling out of her like it hadn't in years. Strangers smiled at the sight, some shaking their heads in quiet amazement. For Hannah, it wasn't just about rolling a little easier, it was about believing for the first time since the accident that her life wasn't over. This chair was no longer a cage. With Daniel's touch, it had become her wings. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they weren't from sadness. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed, but Daniel noticed. "Hey," he said softly, crouching once more so his eyes met hers. "Don't hide those. They're proof you're alive, proof you still believe." Hannah's throat tightened at his words. She had spent so long pretending to be strong, hiding her pain behind polite smiles and silence. Now, here was a stranger telling her it was okay to feel, to hope, to dream again. Her heart swelled, her walls beginning to crack under the weight of his kindness. The world around them seemed to fade away. The busy street, the curious onlookers, even the cafe nearby. All Hannah could focus on was the feeling of freedom and the young mechanic who had brought it back to her. She wasn't just a girl in a wheelchair anymore. She was Hannah Parker, a young woman rediscovering her strength. Daniel hadn't just fixed her chair. He had repaired something inside her that she thought was broken forever. She looked at him, her voice trembling but firm. "You don't even know what you've done for me?" Daniel smiled softly. "Maybe not, but I'm glad I was here." For the first time in months, Hannah didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, cared for, and valued not because of what she had lost, but because of who she was. As the last drops of rain disappeared, the world around her seemed brighter. Daniel gathered his tools, slinging the backpack over his shoulder, ready to leave. But Hannah found herself wishing he wouldn't walk away. This moment, this kindness, had changed her more than she could explain. She had believed miracles no longer existed, yet here she was, moving freely again, her faith quietly restored by a stranger's hands. Weeks passed after that rainy afternoon, and Hannah's life was no longer the same. The memory of Daniel kneeling beside her broken wheelchair replayed in her mind. Each night, she had thought their meeting was just a fleeting encounter, but Daniel continued to check in on her. He would stop by her apartment or call to make sure she was doing all right. For someone who had felt invisible for so long, Hannah now felt seen, valued, and cared for. Every time she heard his voice, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe life still had more to offer. One evening, Daniel arrived at her door carrying something unusual, a bundle wrapped in cloth and tied with string. His hands were stained with grease, and his smile was a little nervous, but his eyes gleamed with pride. "I've been working on something," he said, setting the bundle down gently. Hannah tilted her head, curiosity sparking. When he unwrapped the cloth, she saw metal parts, straps, and small motors carefully assembled into a device that looked part machine, part miracle. "It's a therapy support frame," he explained, "to help strengthen weak legs." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. She had spent months, even years, being told by doctors that walking again was nearly impossible. Yet here was Daniel, a young mechanic with no medical degree, offering her a chance to try. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch the frame, the cool metal pressing against her fingers. "You really think this could work?" she asked softly, afraid to believe. Daniel met her eyes with calm determination. "I don't just think it will, but it'll take patience and you'll need to trust yourself again." The first time they tried, Hannah was terrified. Daniel carefully strapped her legs into the device, adjusting each support until it fit snugly. Her heart pounded as she gripped the handles, her knuckles turning white. With Daniel steadying her, she pushed herself upward. Her legs wobbled, the weight of her body foreign after so long in a chair. She almost gave up, panic rising in her chest. But Daniel's steady voice cut through the fear. "Breathe, Hannah. You're not alone, one step at a time." She inhaled shakily, tears stinging her eyes as she rose to her feet. For a long moment, Hannah just stood there, her legs trembling beneath her. The world felt different from this angle, higher, freer, alive. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I thought I'd never stand again." Daniel smiled, his hand lightly resting on her shoulder. "You just needed a little push." He guided her forward, one tiny step at a time. The sensation of moving, of shifting her weight from one leg to another, filled her with overwhelming emotion. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was fighting her way back to living. Day after day, they practiced together. Sometimes Hannah grew frustrated, her body refusing to cooperate. Other times, she surprised herself by walking across the room with only Daniel's guiding hands for balance. Each success felt monumental, each failure a lesson. Daniel never let her quit. "Strength isn't about never falling," he reminded her gently. "It's about rising every time you do." His patience was unwavering, his encouragement steady. Slowly, Hannah's body remembered what it had forgotten. Muscles awoke, balance improved, and confidence began to blossom in her heart again. News of her progress began to spread quietly. Neighbors noticed her walking in the courtyard with Daniel's support. Friends who hadn't visited in months returned, astonished by the transformation. Soon, whispers turned into stories shared across Seattle. People spoke of a young mechanic who had given a girl her legs back, not through science funded by millions, but through compassion, determination, and belief. Strangers sent messages of encouragement, some even asking Daniel if he could help their loved ones. Hannah realized her journey wasn't just her own anymore. It had become a beacon of hope for others. One afternoon, after weeks of therapy, Hannah stood at the threshold of her apartment, gripping the frame. Daniel gave her an encouraging nod. "Let's try." "Outside," he said softly. Her heart pounded, fear mixing with excitement. With careful steps she moved forward, the sunlight spilling across her face. Passers-by froze as they recognized her, the girl who had always been in a wheelchair, now walking with shaky but determined strides. Applause broke out spontaneously, people cheering her on as tears streamed down her cheeks. She felt like the whole world had opened up again. Daniel watched from beside her, his own chest tightening with emotion. He had fixed countless machines in his life, but nothing compared to this moment. Hannah's laughter rang through the air as she took another step, then another, her movement steadier with each attempt. She turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude that words could never fully express. "You didn't just fix me," she whispered. "You gave me back my life." Daniel shook his head softly. "No, Hannah, you did that. I just reminded you of the strength you already had." That night, Hannah lay in bed, her body sore but her spirit soaring. She thought of the girl she had been months ago. Hopeless, invisible, convinced her future was gone. And now here she was, walking again, her heart burning with dreams she thought she'd lost. She realized Daniel hadn't just given her mobility. He had given her courage, purpose, and the belief that miracles could happen even in the darkest places. She promised herself she would never let that hope fade again. Her journey was far from over, but she was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, Hannah continued to improve. Each day she walked a little farther, her steps a little stronger. The story of her recovery spread beyond her neighborhood, inspiring people across the city. Local news reporters came to document her progress, shining a light on Daniel's extraordinary invention and Hannah's resilience. When asked what motivated her, Hannah smiled and said, "It wasn't just about walking. It was about believing in myself again." And when they asked Daniel, he simply shrugged with humility. Sometimes hope just needs a little push.